Take it away, Michael.
Thank you, Nora. So I live in Maryland now, but I grew up in New Jersey. So any of you from New Jersey, uh, I'm sure you can relate. I remember some years back when New Jersey was trying to come up with a state motto. They invited New Jerseyans to recommend mottos, and my favorite one was New Jersey. You got a problem with that? But just a few towns away from my hometown, a website that I love was created called Old Jews Telling Jokes. And the name described it perfectly. To appear, you had to appear on this site, you had to be at least 60 years old and Jewish. And they just had hundreds of videos of people telling jokes. My favorite one went like this. A man calls his mother and announces, "Mom, I'm finally going to get married." And his mother is overjoyed. And she asks, "So when do I get to meet her?" And the man says, "Listen, Mom, you're so perceptive. I want to play a little game with you. I want to come over to your house with 3 women. I won't tell you anything about them. And you just talk to them and guess which one I'm going to marry." And his mother agrees. The next day, the man shows up with the 3 women. They sit on his mother's couch. He doesn't say a word about them. And his mother starts grilling them. And after about 2 minutes, she stops abruptly and points and says, "The redhead in the middle." The man says, "Mom, that's incredible. I mean, I knew you were intuitive, but you only talked to them for 2 minutes. How can you possibly know that that's the woman I'm going to marry?" And his mother says, "Because I don't like her." And I think of that story often when I think about the reception that many people who get disability benefits from Social Security greet the idea of employment with, about as warmly as that mother did her future daughter-in-law. There are good reasons for that. Many people with disabilities have had to fight long and hard to get benefits from Social Security disability, or SSI benefits. Next slide, please. If a person applies and they're among the majority of people who apply for these benefits and are denied on the first try, they'll have to appeal, and usually appeal twice. It can take well over a year, sometimes over 2 years, to get benefits in the first place. And many times people have little or no money to live on while they're waiting to get approved for the benefits. So by the time people get benefits approved, they've often had to endure financial hardship and just go through a lot of difficulty to get there. By the time they get those benefits, they're very loath to give them up or do anything that might jeopardize them. Now, everybody who gets these benefits, I think, or has applied for them, has heard myths and rumors about what happens, particularly if you go to work. Many people are told, well, if you're able to work, you're not going to qualify for benefits, you'll lose benefits. If you're already working, then you're really sunk. You've got no chance at all. All right. That's actually not at all true. Not true. If there's one myth I'd love for you to not perpetuate after you're done today and not believe, it's that people who are capable of working or already working are not eligible for benefits. You do have to have a disability that limits your ability to work, but it does not have to prevent you from working at all. In fact, I have assisted many people who are currently working, who applied for SSI or Social Security disability while working and were still approved, believe it or not. You just have to know the rules. Now, for many people, concern about their benefits don't outweigh their desires to work, but somebody else in their life, a family member, An advocate or residential program staff person might be deathly afraid of the person losing benefits and might discourage them from working. Next slide, please. So, as I said, it's not true that you have to be incapable of working or even not working when you apply in order to be eligible for benefits. But people become used to having these cash benefits often as their sole source of income. They begin to think of the benefits as their livelihood. They cover their basic expenses. They're not much, but they can rely on this money to pay for food and shelter and other needs. In addition, when people get these cash benefits from Social Security, they get a medical benefit along with them. And people who might be willing to consider working their way off cash benefits are usually very reluctant to consider the possibility of losing any medical benefits. Next slide. So when we talk about the idea of people with disabilities going to work if they get benefits from Social Security, it's kind of like this. This is one of the most famous paintings in the world, Edvard Munch's The Scream, painted in the 1800s. And that's what it feels like to many people to think about the possibility of working if they get benefits from Social Security. So this is one of the most famous paintings in the world. Next slide, please. And this is one of the most famous examples of plagiarism in the world. Very much like The Scream. I'm sure it motivated it. But in any event, people are often terrified of going to work because they're afraid of losing their livelihoods. Next slide. Here's the great news. People who go to work, if they get Social Security benefits, are going to be better off working than not working. You can work and have more money than if you just receive benefits from Social Security. There are special rules, special safety nets called work incentives that help protect benefits when you work, both the cash and the medical benefits. And the work incentives are designed to make sure that you're going to be better off working than not working. Next slide. So what are these magical work incentives of which I speak? They often seem magical because they just seem too good to be true for many people. Next slide. So the work incentives are like safety nets in the sense that they are structured in layers. If you fall through one, there's another one beneath it to catch you and another one beneath that. And without going into great detail about the work incentives, let me just give you their logic. There are work incentives that let people keep their payments from Social Security. People often refer to them as checks, even though Social Security doesn't give out checks anymore. They just directly deposit benefits into your bank account. But there are work incentives that let people keep those payments longer, sometimes permanently, or at higher levels while working than not working. Secondly, there are layers of work incentives that protect medical benefits, even if you work your way off your cash benefits from Social Security. Next slide, please. There are work incentives which, if you've worked your way off the cash benefits, will let you get back on those benefits quickly and easily without having to reapply if anything happens to your job later, which is real vital. A lot of people think, well, I might be able to work my way off benefits, but what happens if I lose the job? And there are additional work incentives that offer extra benefits for people who work. I love these in particular because most people are afraid of losing benefits if they go to work. But there are some work incentives that actually enable people to get additional benefits, but only if they're working. So that really turns your fears on their heads, don't they? Here's an example of being able to go to work and get something extra rather than losing something. And in particular, there's one work incentive that lets people get medical assistance, also known as Medicaid, a very crucial medical benefit in Maryland. And another work incentive that lets people get bigger tax refunds, oftentimes refunds that are bigger than all the taxes taken out of their pay from work. But these work incentives only apply if a person is working for pay. Next slide, please. So what I want to do is talk about both of the disability cash benefits that people can get from Social Security and a little bit about the work incentives that apply to each of them. I'm trying to keep this as basic as possible because we don't have that much time. And I will be telling you how you can get extra one-to-one assistance understanding and using these work incentives so you don't have to master them in an hour and a half. So one of the two primary cash benefits that people can get from Social Security based on disability is called supplemental security income, but everybody calls it SSI for short. So this is a benefit based on financial need. You have to have limited money, have to have income and assets, also called resources, below certain limits in order to qualify. It's based on financial need. It's also based on having a disability that limits your ability to work. But remember, it does not prevent you from working at all, just limits your ability to work. Okay. So SSI provides a monthly cash benefit. It arrives on the first day of the month. The maximum monthly benefit in the state of Maryland is $794 a month for an individual. It's $1,191 a month for a married couple if they're both eligible for SSI. And that's only 1.5 times the individual rate rather than double the individual rate. And this is the reason that many people who get SSI choose to live together without getting married, because if they live together and they're not married, they can each get $794 a month, which is just a little less than $1,600 a month between them. Whereas if they get married, they'll only have $1,191 a month. Now, some states supplement the SSI. They'll give extra state money to people on SSI. Maryland is not one of those. We just provide the maximum $794 a month for an individual, $1,191 for a married couple. If you get any amount of SSI, even the minimum $1 a month, because not everyone gets the maximum, you're automatically eligible for this medical benefit called Medicaid, also known as medical assistance. Because you see, rule number one for bureaucrats trying to confuse the public is give every benefit more than one name. That keeps everyone off balance. So Medicaid is the same as medical assistance. All right. It's called Medicaid in every state, but some states give it another name. And in Maryland, we call it medical assistance as well. Next slide, please. So the logic of the SSI program is that if you're eligible for SSI, it's designed to make sure that you've got at least a basic minimum amount of money to pay for living expenses, particularly food and shelter. So there's a logic to it. You'd figure, well, if you don't have any other money, the only money you've got is SSI, it makes sense that you would qualify for the maximum, $794 a month generally, which is not a lot of money, but it's barely enough for people generally to be able to pay for their food and shelter, perhaps with the help of food stamps for the food, right? On the other hand, if you do have other income, generally you would get less SSI. That follows the logic. If you've got other money, you wouldn't need as much SSI to make sure that you can meet your basic needs for food and shelter. So if you have no other income, you could get generally the maximum SSI. If you have other income, as your other income goes up, your SSI goes down. And the reverse is true too. If your other income goes down, your SSI would go up to offset it. So you can think of the relationship between SSI and other income as being like a balance or a scale or a seesaw. As one side goes down, the other side goes up, and vice versa. All right. So when a person goes to work, as their earnings go up, their SSI goes down. That's logical. But there's great news. And that is, when you go to work, although your SSI will go down as your earnings go up, your SSI will not go down dollar for dollar by your earnings. If you earn $500 a month, your SSI will not be reduced by $500. Who would want to go to work if that were true, right? Luckily, your SSI is reduced by less than half of your gross wages. So as your wages go up, yeah, your SSI goes down, but only a little compared to how much your income increases from your earnings from work. As a result, you come out ahead. You've got more money working than not working, even though your SSI goes down. You're always, always, always better off working than not working if you get SSI payments. Now, there are some special rules that let you get even more SSI or keep more SSI while you're working. Now, in particular, if you're a student and you're under age 22, there is a work incentive that lets you earn over $7,700 a year from wages and not have your SSI reduced at all. It's called the Student Earned Income Exclusion. There's another work incentive that helps you if you're paying for some work-related expenses. If you are paying for expenses that are related to your disability or another medical condition you have, and you need to pay for those expenses at least partly for work, disability-related transportation, attendant care, medical equipment and supplies, medical services, prescriptions, assistive technology. Those are all examples of impairment-related work expenses, as they're called. And those expenses get subtracted from your earnings by Social Security. They don't count all of your earnings. They count what remains after deducting those disability-related expenses. And if the amount of income they count goes down, your SSI income goes up. Remember that balance or scale analogy. So by reducing the amount of earnings that Social Security counts, you can keep more of your SSI while working. People who meet Social Security's definition of blindness can get a deduction for almost all work-related expenses they pay for, even those that have nothing to do with their disability, like taxes withheld from their pay, meals that they eat on the job, and others. There's another work incentive called PASS, that stands for Plan to Achieve Self-Support, that enables you to choose a work goal, usually full-time job or a business, and it helps you pay for the expenses you need to reach that goal by deducting those expenses from your income, increasing your SSI. And the extra SSI helps to offset those expenses you need to pay for to reach your goal. Next slide, please. Now, what happens if you use the work incentives, but nonetheless, your earnings increase high enough, that's your earnings, increase high enough that your SSI is reduced to zero, even in spite of any work incentives you might use? What happens then? That's the point when many people panic. They think, uh-oh, what happens to my medical assistance, my Medicaid? The whole reason I'm getting it is I'm getting SSI payments. If my SSI goes down to zero, will my medical assistance stop? The other concern is, well, I've worked my way off SSI. I've got more money working than not working. But what happens if I lose my job? Am I going to have to reapply and wait another year or two to get my SSI back? Luckily, there is a wonderful work incentive that protects your SSI eligibility if your SSI is reduced to zero because of your earnings. And that provides two protections. It lets you keep your medical assistance, your Medicaid, even though your SSI has stopped. And number two, if anything happens to your earnings later, if you stop working or your earnings drop low enough, you can get your SSI payments back just by calling Social Security and letting them know. You don't have to reapply and wait. You can get that SSI back quickly and easily. And that protection lasts until your earnings are over a certain amount. Currently in 2021 in Maryland, that amount is $44,729 a year. For most people who get SSI, that's a really good income from work. And most people on SSI never reach income at that level. But particularly for people with high Medicaid medical assistance costs, they can often earn even more than this 44,000 plus figure and still be protected by this safety net, this work incentive, still keep their medical assistance and be able to go right back on SSI if anything happens to their earnings later. As a result, if you get SSI, you have nothing to lose working full time, because even if you earn enough to reduce your SSI to zero, you'll still keep your medical assistance and be able to go right back on SSI if anything happens to your job later. And there's no time limit. You can use this work incentive to stay on medical assistance and be able to get back on SSI easily for decades. Okay, next slide, please. Other cash benefit that people get from Social Security based on disability is known as Social Security Disability Insurance, or SSDI. And this highlights rule number 2 for bureaucrats trying to confuse the public, give very different benefits, very similar names. We had SSI, now we have SSDI. There's only one letter different, but they're very different benefits. So SSI was a benefit based on financial need. SSDI is an insurance benefit. It's based on you, the worker, or in some cases, a parent or a deceased spouse, having worked and paid Social Security taxes on their earnings. If you work and you look at your pay stub, you'll see an item, it's usually called FICA, F-I-C-A. That stands for Federal Insurance Contributions Act. And that's the Social Security tax that you pay on your earnings. paying that Social Security tax is like paying insurance premiums. That makes you eligible for SSDI. To get SSDI, you also have to meet Social Security's definition of disability, just like if you receive SSI, meaning you have to have a severe disability that has lasted or is expected to last at least a year, or it's a terminal illness, and it limits your ability to work. Doesn't prevent you from working, but limits your ability to work. So you can get SSDI in any of three ways. One is if you, the person with the disability, have worked and paid Social Security taxes on your earnings in the past yourself. Another way is if you have a parent who worked and paid Social Security taxes on their earnings, and your parent is now either retired and they're getting Social Security retirement benefits, or your parent is disabled and they're getting SSDI based on their own work history, or the parent is deceased. So you can get SSDI in a parent's record in those situations. Thirdly, and this is relatively rare, if you are a disabled widow or widower and your deceased spouse worked and paid Social Security taxes on their earnings, and you're at least 50 years old, you may qualify for a benefit on your deceased spouse's record. But whether you get benefits on your own record, your parents' record, or your deceased spouse's record, if you get SSDI and you go to work, the work rules and the work incentives are all the same for all three ways to get SSDI. Now, like SSI, SSDI comes along with a medical benefit, but it's a different benefit. Instead of Medicaid, it's Medicare. Again, they sound too much alike. It's confusing. But along with SSDI, you get Medicare. There's a catch, though. There's a 2-year wait. With SSI, as soon as you're eligible for SSI, you get medical assistance, Medicaid. With SSDI, you have to be entitled to SSDI for 2 years before your Medicare starts. Next slide, please. So if you're getting SSDI and you go to work, what are the work rules and what are the safety nets, the work incentives? They're very different from the SSI rules. And I am really going to simplify them as much as possible here. I'm leaving out the details. But right off the bat, you can work at least 12 months. Let's say you're getting SSDI, you go to work for the first time since your SSDI started. You can work at least 12 months and earn as much as you want and still keep your full SSDI benefit. Okay. Now, the rules are different if you have worked already since you started getting SSDI. If you work for a while and then you stop work and then you start work again, you won't have a whole 12 months to earn as much as you want and still keep your full benefits. But if you're working for the first time since you started SSDI, the first 12 months you can earn as much as you want, still keep your full benefits. After that, if your earnings are over a certain amount, your payments, your SSDI payments can stop. And that amount currently is $1,310 a month gross wages if you're not blind, and it's $2,190 a month if you are blind. And you might wonder, well, why do blind people get so much of a better deal? Because historically, they've had the best lobby. They just lobbied Congress successfully to have a higher earnings amount, an earnings limit. So if you're working beyond the 12 months and you're earning above these dollar amounts, $1,310 if you're not blind, $2,190 a month if you are blind, there's a chance that your payments could stop. Not necessarily permanently, but they could stop, at least on a month-to-month basis. But it's very important to note that Social Security is not just looking at the gross wages you earn. They're also applying some deductions from your earnings.
Michael,
Yes.
before we go into the deductions, can I stop you for a question?
Sure.
All right. So if a person on SSI qualifies for SSDI under a parent, do they get both SSI and SSDI or just one? And if it's just one, which one is better to opt for?
Okay, great question. And I want to answer it carefully. If a person starts out on SSI and then they become eligible for SSDI, either on a parent's record or their own record or a deceased spouse's record, they will get the benefit, the SSDI benefit first. That will be their primary benefit. And they're actually required to accept that benefit. It's not like you have a choice. You can't just say, well, no, I'll just stay on SSI. You can keep the SSDI. SSI is a benefit of last resort. And to be eligible for it, you have to agree to apply for and accept any other benefit you might be entitled to, especially SSDI. So if you get SSI and then you become eligible for SSDI, Social Security will start your SSDI. Now, what will happen to your SSI? That depends on how much SSDI you're getting. If your SSDI benefit is high enough, that will stop your SSI benefit completely. Currently, if your SSDI benefit were $814 a month or more in the state of Maryland, you would not be eligible for an SSI benefit at all. So your SSI would stop completely, but you would have more money than you would receiving SSI. If your SSDI benefit is less than $814 a month, and you don't have any other income, then you could receive your full SSDI benefit and a reduced SSI benefit. So you can get a partial SSI benefit if your SSDI is low enough. So you start out on SSI, you become eligible for SSDI, you have to take the SSDI, and depending on the amount of the SSDI, you would either keep a little bit of SSI or you wouldn't get any SSI. I hope that answers the question. It was a good one. Anything else in the chat so far, Nora?
He just says, thank you for your answer.
Okay, great. You're welcome. All right, so we're going back to SSDI. And the idea here is when Social Security is figuring out if your earnings are over or under the limit after those 12 months, they're not just looking at your gross wages. They're looking at your gross wages, and then they're subtracting certain deductions that you're allowed. And then they look at what's left over. If the amount that's left over after the deductions is under the limit, then they'll count your earnings to be under the limit, and you'll still be able to keep your full SSDI payments. So it's not just how much you earn, it's how much you earn and how much is left over after the deductions. Next slide, please. So what kind of deductions can you use? Well, if there are expenses that you're paying for that are related to your disability or another medical condition, that are needed for work, I mentioned those earlier, they're called impairment-related work expenses, you get to deduct those from your earnings. Also, suppose you are working in a job and you're getting paid the full wage for your job. But let's say that you're working a little more slowly than your non-disabled coworkers because of your disability. Or maybe there are certain duties that you can't fully perform in the job because of your disability. In other words, your productivity is actually a little lower than maybe your non-disabled coworkers. What Social Security is supposed to do is subtract the portion of your earnings that doesn't really reflect your productivity. So let's say you get paid 100% of the wage for your job, but your employer estimates that you're working at about 90% productivity. So you're maybe working a little more slowly than your coworkers. Technically, that's like saying you're paid 100% of the wage, but you're really only earning 90% of it. The other 10%, you're not technically earning. And they'll subtract that 10% from your wages, keeping the amount that they count lower. Some people get extra help to do their jobs. Maybe that extra help comes from a coworker or a supervisor. Maybe it comes from a job coach, or maybe people get extra help from 2 or 3 of those sources. If you're getting extra help, then in theory, you're not doing all of the job on your own. You're getting extra help to do it. So there's a deduction based on receiving the extra help as well. And you come up with values for each of these deductions, excuse me, and subtract all of them from your gross monthly wages. If the difference is below those target figures, if we could go to the previous slide, if the amount that's left after the deductions is less than $1,310 a month if you're not blind, or less than $2,190 a month if you are blind, then Social Security will say, okay, well, your earnings are still under the limit because of those deductions. You'll still get to keep your SSDI. Okay, and please advance 2 slides.
I'm just going to stop you there.
Sure.
Somebody would like some clarification about how SSDI affects your Medicaid.
Okay. I'm pausing here to think about how much detail to go into here, because I could really get in the weeds on this, and I don't want to do that. So remember that SSDI is a benefit that comes with Medicare after a 2-year wait. Medicaid, also known as medical assistance, is a very different medical benefit. You can get Medicaid by receiving SSI. That's one way to get it. There are actually dozens of other ways that you can get Medicaid. Now, if a person gets SSDI, they may or may not be eligible for Medicaid. There are dozens of different ways that they could be eligible for Medicaid. And if they receive SSDI, they may or may not meet the eligibility criteria for one of those ways to get Medicaid, or possibly even more than one way to get it. Now, let's say that a person starts out with SSDI and they're not currently receiving Medicaid. It's often the case that their circumstances could change in a way that they would then become eligible for Medicaid. So they could start out not being eligible for Medicaid, and then their situation changes and they become eligible for Medicaid. There are other people who might start out on Medicaid before they get SSDI. Then they start getting SSDI, and they might be able to either keep Medicaid the way they have it or lose it. But if they lose the Medicaid, there may be another way for them to be eligible for Medicaid. So instead of losing it, they just switch from one way to get Medicaid to another way to get Medicaid. I know that's a little vague in general, but if I start talking about the dozens of different ways to qualify for Medicaid, you're going to be totally bored and we're going to run out of time. But this is an excellent question to ask a benefits counselor, and I'm going to be telling you how you can get benefits counseling before we finish. That's one-to-one assistance, being able to use these work incentives, these safety nets, and learn how they apply to you particularly, rather than a general presentation like this one. So one of the key things that benefits counselors are focused on is, if medical assistance would be a good benefit for you and you're not already receiving it, is there a way you could qualify for it? And they'll explain how. Secondly, if you're already getting medical assistance, Medicaid, and your circumstances change, like you start getting SSDI, or you go to work, or you increase your earnings, can you keep your Medicaid the way you're getting it now? If so, great. If not, if you're going to lose the type of Medicaid you have now, is there another way you can keep Medicaid instead of losing it? And usually there is. So I apologize for that answer being a bit vague, but if I get any more detailed than that, it's just going to take us on too much of a tangent. It's an excellent question, and thank you for it. All right. So we've got these deductions from income, from earnings, that can help you keep SSDI, even if your earnings go above those usual limits, the $1,310 a month if you're not blind, $2,190 a month if you are blind. But what if your earnings go up high enough that even after those deductions, your earnings will still be over the limit? What's left over will still be over those limits. Well, in that case, your SSDI payment will stop, at least on a month-to-month basis, when your earnings after deductions are over the limit. But there are safety nets that will let you go back on SSDI payments quickly and easily if anything happens to your job later, if your earnings later drop below the limit or you stop working. You do not have to reapply and start all over again. Okay. There are other work incentives, safety nets, that will let you keep your Medicare for years longer, or often even permanently, even if you've worked your way off SSDI. So if you think about these work incentives, they're kind of similar to one of the work incentives we talked about for SSI. Keep your medical benefits, maybe permanently, and be able to go back on your SSDI payments if anything happens to your job later. All right. There's an additional work incentive that I love. It's one of my favorites that people on SSDI can use. It's called the Employed Individuals with Disabilities Program. It's also known as EID for short. Some people call it IED. That actually stands for Improvised Explosive Device. So not exactly the marketing angle the state had in mind when they created the program, but whatever you call it, it's a powerful work incentive that lets a person who's not otherwise eligible for Medicaid, for medical assistance, get Medicaid if they're working and they meet a few other conditions. It's a great way for people on SSDI who don't get Medicaid another way, if they work, to get Medicaid, to get medical assistance. And this is one of those work incentives I was talking about earlier that actually lets you get an extra benefit if you're working rather than losing something. So if you get SSDI and you're not getting Medicaid, and then you go to work, you may very well be eligible to get Medicaid, medical assistance, through this EID program. Next slide, please. Also wanted to tell you about a work incentive called PASS. I kind of mentioned it earlier. Stands for Plan to Achieve Self-Support. And it's a work incentive that helps you reach a work goal. You have to write a plan and submit it to Social Security and get it approved. And the plan specifies what your specific work goal will be. I want to be a full-time bookkeeper. I want to be a self-employed plumber or choreographer, whatever it might be. And you lay out the expenses you need to pay for to reach that goal. It could be transportation, even buying a car, education, training, tools, equipment, uniforms, childcare if you need that to be able to work, expenses to start a business, and lots of others. And the PASS helps you pay for those expenses by giving you more SSI money than you would receive without the PASS. So if you started out on SSI and you're working, and your earnings would usually reduce your SSI, you can use a PASS to keep the full amount of SSI while you're working. And that extra SSI you're getting to keep will offset the out-of-pocket expenses to reach your goal. Now, let's say you get SSDI and your SSDI benefit is too high for you to get any SSI. Believe it or not, you can actually use a PASS to qualify for SSI. So then you'd be getting SSDI and SSI. And the SSI money, once again, would help to offset the out-of-pocket costs you're paying for to reach your goal. Now, one of the kinds of expenses that a PASS can be used for is assistive technology and motor vehicles. The Maryland Technology Assistance Program, which is a co-host of this training, operates 2 low-interest loan programs for people with disabilities to buy assistive technology, and that even includes motor vehicles. If you wanted to qualify for a loan to get assistive technology or a motor vehicle through the Maryland Technology Assistance Program, you might consider using a PASS that would give you extra income in the form of SSI payments or higher SSI payments, which you could use to make your loan payments. And it might make you more likely to be approved for a loan and better able to afford your monthly loan payments. So that's an excellent use of a PASS if you're interested. Okay, next slide, please. So I already mentioned some of these kinds of expenses a PASS can be used to pay for. I didn't mention computers. Computers are another item you can get a loan from the Maryland Technology Assistance Program to pay for. Let's see, anything else I didn't mention yet? No, I think everything else I mentioned is on this list. So it covers a pretty broad range of expenses as long as the expenses are needed to reach your work goal. Next slide, please. And I think I've already covered this as well. Now, a PASS is time limited. So when you submit a pass to Social Security and they have to approve it, you're detailing how long you expect it'll be before you reach your work goal and how long you need to pay off the expenses to reach that goal. It can usually last for several years and enable you to get more SSI or even qualify for SSI during the period that you're using the pass. Next slide, please. So are you really better off working? So far, I've been giving you these vague generalities. Let's look at a couple of real examples of people working who get SSI or SSDI and see if they really are going to be better off working than not working. Next slide, please. So we're going to start with Melody, who gets SSI. To begin with, she was getting the maximum $794 a month of SSI. Now, I apologize for using a wage for Melody that is currently under the minimum wage, which is now, I think, $11.75 an hour. But I had difficulty changing the chart that appears on the next slide for some technical reason. So I left $11 an hour as Melody's hourly wage. At the time I developed this, that was above the minimum wage. But this will still give you the idea. So Melody starts out working 20 hours a week, earning $11 an hour. Later, she gets an increase in hours and works 30 hours a week, same $11 an hour. And finally, she moves up to full-time, 40 hours a week, still earns $11 an hour. I'm going to show you now what happens to Melody's net income each time she starts working or increases her hours. Next slide, please. All right, so we've got a bar graph here. In the first column, in blue, you see SSI only, and you can see when she's only getting SSI and not working, Melody's income is just under $800 a month. It's $794. In the second column, she's working 20 hours a week, making $11 an hour, and her SSI is reduced. You'll see the blue that represents the SSI is reduced, and it's down to roughly half of what it was to start with. But in the orange part of the bar, that represents her wages after taxes. I wanted you to see how much she's really going to have left even after taxes are taken out. And when you add her wages after taxes onto her reduced SSI, she's got over $1,200 a month of net income. So she's definitely better off working than not working. Her SSI is reduced, but it's not reduced as much as her income increases from her wages. Next, the third column, she's working 30 hours a week. The SSI goes down even more. There's not much left there at all, only about $100 a month roughly. But when you add the wages after taxes on top of that, she's got more money, getting closer to $1,400 a month than she did working 20 hours a week. Finally, in the fourth column, she's working 40 hours a week. Her wages are high enough to reduce her SSI to zero. But even without any SSI, she's got about $1,600 a month income after taxes. So she's better off. So with SSI, you're better off working than not working. And the more you earn, the more hours you work, the more money you'll have. Next slide, please.
Hey, Michael.
Yes.
Someone has a question about where to get pass forms.
Okay. If you wanted to submit a pass, a plan to achieve self-support to Social Security, I would really strongly urge you to confer with a benefits counselor. And I do promise I'm going to tell you how to get free benefits counseling before we finish, because there's a lot to know about PASS and how it'll work for you before you actually write one. Okay. But there is a PASS form that you can get online. And I'm trying to remember the form number. It's escaping me right now, forgive me. But I think if you Google plan to achieve self-support form, it should come up. Every Social Security form has a name or a number. It starts with SSA and then it has a number. And I just don't remember the number. But again, I really would urge you, if you're considering a PASS, to speak with a benefits counselor who can help you prepare the PASS.
Great, thank you.
Sure.
And someone else would like to know if a person can still get Medicaid if they no longer qualify for SSI.
Can a person still get Medicaid if they no longer qualify for SSI? And the answer is absolutely yes. Now, it depends on their circumstances. Remember, I said there are dozens of different ways to get Medicaid. Each one has different eligibility requirements. But in many, many cases, if a person's SSI stops, particularly if it stops due to wages or due to getting too much SSDI, there are ways that the medical assistance can continue. Now, we talked about one of them a little earlier when I said that even if your wages go up high enough to reduce your SSI to 0, there's a safety net that lets you stay eligible for SSI and keep your medical assistance. That's one way. There's another protection for people who start out on SSI and then switch to SSDI on their parents' work record, not on their own, but on their parents' work record. If the SSDI they get on the parents' record is high enough to stop the SSI, then they won't be getting Medicaid based on SSI any longer. But there's another way to get Medicaid, a protection that would let them keep the Medicaid anyway, even though their SSI stopped. Then there's also the Employed Individuals with Disabilities, or EID program. So if somebody earns so much money from work that they're no longer eligible for that protection for Medicaid for workers with disabilities that has an income limit of over $44,000 a year that I mentioned earlier, they may be able to earn even more money and still get Medicaid through the EID, the Employed Individuals with Disabilities program. So in most cases, if somebody loses eligibility for Medicaid, there may be another way that they can get Medicaid and avoid losing it. So thank you. That was a great question. And anything
Great,
else,
thanks,
Nora?
Michael.
Sure.
That's it for now.
Okay. All right. And I wanted to use another example here. This is Buster, who gets SSDI. And he starts out getting only SSDI of $850 a month. And he starts working 20 hours a week and earns $13.75 an hour. And if you do the math, what you'll see is that Buster's earnings would be below that $1,310 a month limit that applies to people who are not blind. So he would keep his SSDI indefinitely as long as his earnings stay at that level. But then he gets a better job working 40 hours a week full-time and earning $15 an hour. And at that level of earnings, his earnings would be clearly well over the limit. And even after any deductions he might be able to come up with, his what was left over would almost certainly still be above the limit. So his SSDI would stop. But if we go to the next slide, we can compare his net income in each situation. So in the first column, when he's getting only $850 a month SSDI, which you can see in blue, that's his only income. In the second column, working the part-time job at $13.75 an hour, his wages, again, after taxes have been deducted, that shows up in green. Because his wages are below the limit, he keeps his full SSDI benefit, which you see in blue. SSDI, incidentally, is an all or nothing benefit. If your earnings stay under the limit, you keep the full amount. Once your earnings go over the limit, the benefit goes down to zero. All right, but you can see with the SSDI and the part-time wages, Buster is way better off. His net income is approaching $2,000 a month. But working full-time at $15 an hour, even though Buster's SSDI will stop, even after taxes, he's got more money than he would have if he were working part-time and keeping his SSDI. And that's true for everybody on SSDI. If you're able to earn enough from a full-time job, you could have more money working full-time without SSDI than you would working part-time and keeping SSDI. Plus, you've got those other safety nets that will let you keep your Medicare, even if you work your way off SSDI, and let you get back on SSDI without having to reapply if anything happens to your job later. So not only can a person on SSDI be better off working, but if they're able to earn enough working full-time, they can be better off even without their SSDI payment. Next slide, please. So you really are better off working and better off earning more than less. Next slide. So how can you get free help to use work incentives, free benefits counseling? If you have a case open with DOORS, the Maryland Division of Rehabilitation Services, you can ask your DOORS counselor to arrange benefits counseling for you at no cost to you. DOORS counselors are required to provide benefits counseling through expert certified benefits counselors for anybody with a case open with DOORS who gets SSI or SSDI. And the benefits counselor can also help you understand the impact of different levels of earnings you might consider, not only on your SSI, your SSDI, your Medicaid, and your Medicare, but also other benefits you might receive, like food stamps, rental assistance, unemployment benefits, etc. Now, if you don't have a case open with DOORS and you're not planning on getting one open very soon, then you can get free benefits counseling by calling the Ticket to Work helpline at 866-968-7842. And if you're one of the rare people who still have a TTY, you can call 866-833-2967 and explain your situation. I get SSI or SSDI. I'm trying to go to work or I'm already working, and they'll connect you with free benefits counseling or work incentives counseling, as it's also called. And I'm not sure if we have another slide or not after this. but let's try. Next slide, please. That was it. Okay. So does anyone have any additional questions or comments?
Thank you so much, Michael. It was fantastic, first of all. And we do have another question from someone who says, I work in a school system and often get questions from parents of students with disabilities related to SSI and SSDI. What resources may I provide to them to answer their questions? Which I guess anything additional to DOORS and the Ticket to Work helpline.
Right. For a person getting SSI or SSDI who's either already working or actively pursuing work, the slide that's currently showing is definitely the information you want to provide to the family. You know, if you've got a case open with DOORS, the DOORS counselor can arrange the free benefits counseling. If not, then you can refer them to the Ticket to Work helpline, and they'll get the free benefits counseling through that source. What if you just want to provide general information? Let's say you're working with parents in the school system who don't know whether their sons or daughters are going to be pursuing work, but they just want to get a general idea of what would happen if they did. There are some resources. If you go to Maryland Works website, mdworks.com, generally about 4 times a year, they host a full-day workshop that provides a lot more detail than I did right now about these work incentives. And I know that because I teach it. So that's one way you could get more information. If you'd like to get more information online on Social Security's website, you can go to ssa.gov, the Social Security Administration website, and in the search field, type in Red Book on Work Incentives, or probably even just Red Book would do it. And that will connect you with a booklet that describes all of the work incentives I've covered and more, which I find very useful. And I would say those are probably the best ways to get parents more information. Now, some school systems hire me to do trainings of maybe a couple of hours for parents, in which I talk about eligibility for SSI, the SSI application process, the SSI work incentives, and a little bit of information about SSDI. I focus mostly on SSI because usually students who are 21 or younger, if they're going to be eligible for benefits, are probably going to be getting SSI rather than SSDI. But that's another possibility. Okay, thank you for that question. Anyone else, Nora? We have plenty of time.
I'm not seeing anything at the moment.
Okay. Well, thank you everyone for participating. I enjoyed this. I hope you got something out of it.
Yes, thank you all for joining us, and thank you so much, Michael. It was fantastic. And we have lots more webinars surrounding financial resiliency for people with disabilities coming up this month. I put my email in the chat, so please feel free to contact me with any questions, or if you want access to slides that you've seen here or in other sessions, or if you want information about future sessions. All right, thank you so much.
All right, and with that, we will end the recording today and hope everybody has a great rest of their day. Take care, everyone.